Well, this is all a bit shit, isn't it? This isn't a good morning. This is another awful morning, another miserable morning. This is another group therapy session for us Arsenal fans, trying to get over yet another miserable loss. Let's see if we can't come up with a solution over the course of the next 10-15 minutes or so. This is Blog on You Gunners. This is our post-match review. I think the first thing I noticed more than anything else was the lack of change, really, from the matches against Leeds and Villa in terms of how we were going about our business. Oba carried on down the middle, as he did against Leeds, but it was no more or less effective or productive than it had been at Ellen Road, to be honest. He can't get in the game, whether he's on the left wing or in the centre, if the ball's not coming up to him. And once again, the ball wasn't coming up to him in any sort of sustained or meaningful way. Quite why that is can only be tracked back to the midfield too, Ceballos and Xhaka, who have shown time and again that they can't progress the ball. They pick it up off the defence, they go sideways, they go backwards. And if they do go forwards, it's slow, and it just comes straight back to them anyway. And it's becoming a huge problem now, to the point where we're dangerously predictable for teams who know they can really squeeze up on those two, because they're not going to move it quickly. They're not going to find a way through them. The three that sit behind Wolves' defending players aren't going to be found. They're not going to be caught out, so they can afford to squeeze up and really press them hard. And then they're just content for them to pass it backwards, go across the back line, and you can stand off and watch from there. Because with the exception of David Luiz, nobody's going to play a ball in behind you, really. I know Gabriel and Rob Holding have tried to step out with the ball at their feet in recent weeks, but it's not really proving particularly effective. In changing things up, there's no difference in result invariably. They'll step out 5 yards, play a square ball, and it'll just go back because there are no options further up. Where we have been finding joy, if there is any to be found, it's in the wide areas. But again, that risks being dangerously predictable. Teams know we're not coming through the middle, so they can afford to stack it out wide. Against Wolves, we had Saka in wide areas, Saka and Tierney on one side, and Bellerin with Willian on the other side. Interestingly, it was a minor variation this week to see Ceballos tucking in at right back when Bellerin moved forward, so that it created a sort of mini overload there. Willian and Bellerin in close proximity with Ceballos behind meant that they could work a few patterns, something that they hadn't done before, and it was interesting, reasonably productive. It had some joy with working around the Wolves left back and left midfield there, but it only worked in small patches. There's no really sustained period where those two were making big inroads in the first half. On the other wing, there wasn't too much happening. We had a few balls into the box from either side, but with only Aubameyang in the middle, it was fairly comfortably dealt with by Wolves. With Aubameyang marked, there was no other threats really. I mean, Joe Willock wasn't on the line in the same way that Aubameyang is. He was 5-10 yards further back, which means only a cutback would have found him. Those weren't the balls we were playing. As a result, it was a pretty unproductive first half going forward, about as unproductive as it has been for weeks now. It wasn't any better, despite all the work that Arteta, I'm sure, is trying to do in trying to develop combinations and patterns of play. Nothing changed in that first half. It was lousy. There's no two ways around that. The Wolves' goals were opportunistic, were smart, were quick. We're all about quick thinking in a way that we weren't quick to the punch at all. Neto and Traore were allowed to run at our defenders too readily without protection. And those runs generated real problems for us. They managed to get in on our back four fairly easily, bypassing the midfield too. And that's where their best chances came from. That's where their goals came from in that first half. There was a shade of luck about both. You could argue that the ball fell to them in very fortunate ways. But again, you could argue that their positioning and their speed of thought allowed them that luck. 3 or 4 defenders beaten to the ball on both occasions by one man who reacted quickest to poke home and score twice, which is really not good enough in either event, really. For our part, we did manage a goal. It was a good move down the right, and it was a smart cross from Willian, who was better than he has been. He was more involved. I think the idea to move Bellerin closer to him certainly paid dividends in that respect and made him a better player, a better prospect. And it was his good cross that found Gabriel at the back post, nodded home for a pretty good goal. And I thought at that point, once we'd equalised, that we might iron out the nonsense further behind, but we really didn't in that first half. We slipped back into the same pattern pretty quickly, and that inevitably brought the second goal for Wolves, who come into this game, I read, hadn't managed a first half goal all season. So it was therefore inevitable and written in stone that they would get at least one against us, and in the event it was two. So we head into half-time still lacking any sort of sustained, demonstrable penetration. Any lacking has to be pinned on the manager, I think. He hasn't done enough to change what's going on up top. And it was a big team talk for him at half-time. He needed to change things. He needed to get some bloody urgency into this team, because there's nothing in terms of energy. It's been sapped from them. They're not raising their game. They're just sitting at a 6 or a 6.5 and cruising and not lifting it and not creating pressure, and that's why they're so easy to play against. That said, in the second half, they were better. I imagine they got a real bollocking at the break, and they deserved it because they were flat as heck again. But in the second period, they played further up and they were moving it quicker from side to side. And surprise, surprise, that brought with it some more and better chances. But that's all well and good if you're putting them away, or putting at least one of the bloody things away. If you're creating a handful of chances and still not putting the fucking things away, it's irrelevant. I saw a stat, courtesy of Sky Sports, after the game, that Arsenal's shooting accuracy was 15% to Wolves' 45%. And if that doesn't sum up the problem, I don't know what does. We're not creating a tremendous amount, and when we do, we can't put it away for shit. It's just not going on target. We're wasting great opportunities, and we really needed to not do that in that second half. We needed our renewed effort and endeavour to pay dividends. On a positive note, I guess it was good to see that they didn't carry on in the same vein in the second half. They did step up a little, they did move forward, they did pressure Wolves, who sat deeper and deeper, which is the cardinal sin, I guess. I think they were probably content to play on the break, but they didn't have that much joy in the second half in that respect. They, I think, were a bit too negative. Perhaps they were confident in their defensive ability and in Arsenal's inability to create and score, and in that sense I guess they were correct, because there were some real glares that they missed on the day. I think of the chance for Saka, a good cross from Bellerin. He misjudged his jump. He should have gone with his head. He went with his left leg and in the end shinned it wide. That was a really poor miss. Aubameyang, who looked like he had the hump for all of that second half, placed a header wide that should have been minimum on target for a player of his quality. It's got to be on target as a minimum, if not in the back of the net. It was right on his head. He was more or less unimpeded. Yes, there was a man in front of him, but I still don't see how he doesn't hit the target there. It was a poor, poor miss, and it was a poor game from him. I don't think he's got any excuses. There was a moment when he nabbed the ball off of Patricio in the Wolves goal, 18 yards out. Nobody to beat, really. There was a covering defender, but if Aubameyang would have acted decisively and aggressively enough, it would have made no difference whether the defender was there or not in the event. He dithered, he turned, he tried to get back on his right foot, and by the time he'd managed that, it was done and dusted. There were 3 or 4 players back, and the keeper was on his line, and the threat was really gone. It was tepid from him and symptomatic of his apparent disaffection with the game. He really did not look happy in that second half, and that transmitted into the pretty abject misses from him, those two incidents. There was also a pretty poor miss from Reece Nelson, introduced on the hour mark in place of Willian. For what it's worth, I don't think Willian had a bad game. I think he did pretty well, his best game since Fulham on the opening day. But I think perhaps the injury was present in Arteta's mind, so he took him off after 60. Great to see Reece get a go. I don't think he was impactful as he might have liked. He got himself into good dribbling positions where he was able to run at people, but unlike Traore, he wasn't decisive enough. He dithered when he should have run for the line and given it a go. Traore does it, and maybe 3 times out of 10 it works, but those 3 times out of 10 really create something. He created a goal for them in the first half through just such a run. He backs his pace and he backs his power, and it pays off. And I think Reece should have done the same. Not to say he was terrible, but I think he would have hoped for better, particularly when the ball fell to him 8-9 yards out. Took it on his chest, fell on the volley, and he hit it over the bar when he really should, again, have been hitting the target as a minimum. And for me, I think that chance has to go in. This was, I think I alluded to in my pre-match preview, massive chance for Reece and Joe Willock and Bukayo Saka to really begin the transition from the old to the new, begin the revitalisation of Arsenal as a new era. And that really could have done with going in. I think that would have done his stake a world of good for a first team place. His efforts to date have earned him a place on the bench, and this would have gone one better as it was. He missed a really good chance that I'm sure he'll be kicking himself over. And ditto Saka and Aubameyang. A draw wouldn't have been a disaster. It still would have been bad, but it would have been a darn sight better than the pretty abject performance we slumped to in the end, that we couldn't muster a goal in the second half. It was damning. And we didn't have a shot on target for all the opportunities that we had. We couldn't get one on target, which backs up and bears out the statistic that our accuracy was just 15% in front of goal, which is pathetic. We can't do that. We can't afford to do that, because we will be outscored routinely. While Mikel was sticking to a defensive formation, we were at least drawing up the goals. In a bid to rebalance this side, he has loosened the strings, as it were, and allowed us to be more ambitious going forward. But the worst of both worlds result of that is that we're worse at the back now, and there's no offset in the amount of goals that we're scoring. We're still scoring a measly amount, and that all adds up to the worst start since the early 1980s. And who would have thought that after winning the FA Cup in the summer? This was looking like a new season in which we'd start to kick on and make progress. Even if it was small progress, I thought we'd make progress. I think we all thought we'd make progress. Instead, we are regressing towards the peak of the Emery days, and how woeful were those when we had no shape, no belief and no ambition. And it reeked of it again in that first half last night. The second half was better, but it was still unproductive for all of its endeavour. And that's massively worrying for Mikel, who needs to get a grip. The addition of Thomas Partey would take the team up 2 or 3 levels, but the reality is he's out for a fair chunk of time now. I don't think he's back for the North London derby, and maybe another week after that. So that's another 3 or 4 games we're going to be without him. And something needs to be done in the meantime until he gets back. We're going to have to make it work, whether that means we go back, as I've said in the blog, whether we go back to 5 at the back, just shut up shop and play on the break until such time as we have the personnel to move to 4 at the back, so be it. Because we can't go on playing like we are, lest we get sucked into a relegation battle. We're a mid-table team at the moment. We're playing like a mid-table team. Something needs to change in order to turn this around, because the North London derby next week doesn't bear thinking about. That normally brings an increase in effort with it, but for all the effort, you can put all the effort in the world that you like. If you can't create or score goals, it's just going to be miserable. And a defeat in that game, a heavy defeat in that game next week, is going to send us into, I don't know what sort of territory. In terms of the fan base, the toxicity will be at a whole new level. Maybe it's the perfect game, maybe it's not in that sense, but it's not really what we want given the form that we're in. we need to be looking for something better. At the moment, there's not much light at the end of the tunnel. There's not much cause for hope. So we're going to need something. It'd be interesting to see what the manager does in the Europa League game this week. Whether he rests, whether he gets that first team out there to get them firing. That might be one way to kick them into life. Or he may just get them around the collar and knock their heads together this week and really put it up them, because we need more. The fans need more. We're on the cusp of turning against this manager. I think patience is there still, but those first rumblings are coming. And that's not good for him. That's not good for his project. That's not good for the players, whose heads seem to drop super quickly. Let's hope for more. Let's hope for better. I think for the moment, Gunners, that's it off of my chest. I think we could probably go on for an hour whinging about various aspects of the game. But I think I'll leave it there for today. It wasn't fantastic. There's not much to be cheerful about at the moment. Hopefully over the coming days we'll get some good news. In the meantime, if you can drop us a like, leave us a comment, follow what we're doing, that would be great. That'd be much appreciated. But for now, try and enjoy your Monday. Take care.